Just before we get started, I'd just like to introduce myself. If I can get my slides to move. There we go. So I am Vicky Utting and I'm the Managing Executive at IT Governance Publishing and Vigilance Software. I've got over 10 years of experience in the publishing industry and I've held roles in marketing, book and toolkit production and management. And as part of my role, I thoroughly enjoy providing guidance and support to all of our authors through every step of their publishing journey. So just to introduce IT Governance Publishing, so some of you on this webinar may be aware of IT Governance Limited, which is one of our sister companies, and both IT Governance and IT Governance Publishing are subsidiaries of GRC International Group. And you can see on the right-hand side in that graphic the other companies that make up the group as a whole. So within IT Governance Publishing, as the word publishing might allude you to believe, our focus is books and toolkits and publications. So we collaborate with industry experts to produce high quality publications, and we cover best practice frameworks, compliance, technical subjects, and we are always looking for new ways to get our information out into the world and in front of industry leaders and decision makers. Now, before we get started, just a few house rules for the audience. So delegates will be muted during the session. However, you can submit any questions that you have ready for the second part of the session using the question function of the webinar panel. We are recording today's session and we will email slides and the recording out to you all tomorrow. And you can also download the slides from the handout section of the webinar panel. So in terms of the format today, we're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes introducing our wonderful panelists. Then the main discussion is going to be around 30 to 35 minutes. And then at the end, we will spend 10 to 15 minutes with questions from the audience. So Claire, we've got Claire. She is our director at Scopism and ITSM Zone. Claire, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. Hopefully it's going to be an enjoyable session. I've worked in service management for about 2 decades now, pretty much my entire career. Had a lot of different roles during that time, but the sort of the relevant piece today is the fact that I was the founder of Scopism, which is the organisation that led on the creation of the SIAM bodies of knowledge, supported by amazing industry experts like Michelle and Simon. I've worked with IT Governance Publishing for quite a lot of years now. I don't know exactly how many, but originally publishing ITIL study guides. So that was ITIL version 3, and now I've got the ITIL 4 study guides that we've co-published, and of course now IT Governance, really pleased to work with them to publish the SIAM box as well in their hard copy format. So yeah, really enjoy working with IT Governance and looking forward to today's session.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. Next up we have got Simon. Simon is Manager for Service Management at Kinetic IT. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Excellent, yeah, good day everyone. Morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Guess you can read all the things out there. I'll tell a little bit more about Kinetic IT, which is predominantly Australian kind of enterprise service management organisation. So service management is at the core of what we do, and we're very much into all kinds of best practices, which for a number of decades has been predominantly ITIL. And I did, together with Michelle and other people, the training and consulting in that space. And I guess what I want to highlight for today is that it was about 2014, 2015 that we started looking into this service integration concept. We'll obviously talk more about that today, and found that there were lots of different opinions about what it was, what it wasn't, what it should be, and things like that. And that was kind of the point where we got in touch with Claire and a whole bunch of people from around the world to say, let's kind of write down these bodies of knowledge that codify and categorize what SIAM really should be. And I was going to say the rest is history, but maybe Michelle can tell the rest because got a very similar background there.
Brilliant, thanks Simon. And that leads us perfectly over to Michelle. So Michelle, you're also at Kinetic IT, Manager for Service Management Capability. Take it away.
I normally have the fortunate opportunity to say what he said or what Simon said at this point, so I can pretty much do that. But I should probably add that, I mean, much like Simon, my career was not necessarily in Australia where I am in now, but many years in the UK. So ostensibly working in the thick end, and I remember in the early 2000s we were doing SIAM in the UK, but we weren't calling it service integration. We were calling it multi-supplier integration. I was working over in India and doing transitions in that regard. But I think what's quite interesting is, and Simon's alluded to it, Claire's mentioned it as well, was the codification of the bodies of knowledge was really the opportunity to get people talking in a similar language. So not new. Certainly for me, but a good opportunity to just formalise SIAM. And the rest of the stuff, as we say here, I love everything to do with service management best practice. So I'm really sort of keen to talk a little bit more about how SIAM works with other best practices and frameworks. I'm sure Claire and Simon will similarly extol the virtues of all of the above. So looking forward to the conversation with you all today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michelle. So, as we've already alluded to, so today's discussion, we're going to answer some questions that introduce SIAM for those that are new to it. We're then going to be talking about the SIAM marketplace and how SIAM can be applied to IT services. We're going to take a look at the key strategic drivers and the essential skills and capabilities required in a SIAM transformation. And then we're also going to provide some insight into the global SIAM survey results. And then finally, we're going to finish and look at why professionals should be looking to choose the SIAM Foundation and the professional body of knowledge. So let's dive into the questions. What is the role of SIAM in an organisation? Claire, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I will do, and stop me if it looks like I'm going to consume the whole hour. But to summarise, really, SIAM is a way of extending service management capabilities to allow an organisation to work with multiple service providers as part of service delivery. So, you know, that the concept of outsourcing is not a new one. You know, most businesses understand the concept of outsourcing, but a lot of the original outsource contracts were these single monolithic contracts with one service provider who was doing everything. And what a lot of organisations found was elements of that were working really well, but then some elements were overpriced or not the supplier's specialist area. So they were getting kind of a mixed bag of services from the single provider. Excuse me. So that's evolved now, and most organisations have a whole variety of service providers that contribute to the makeup of the services that they deliver to their customers and their consumers. And somehow we need a way to manage that. I mean, one of the examples that I always use with SIAM is the fact that sometimes you have an incident in the middle of the night, and if you're the person who's responsible for that service, you reach out to the organisation that you think would be responsible for it. So, you know, maybe it's an application, so you reach out to the application provider. Quite often you find that they'll come back and say, oh, no, definitely not the application, it must be the database. So you speak to the database provider and they say, no, definitely not us. Have you tried the infrastructure team? And these things bounce around because in a non-SIAM world, it's very easy for everybody to just be focused on my contract, my targets. How do I get this off my desk as quickly as possible, because it looks like it could cause a breach or cost me some money. So what SIAM does is it takes things like a traditional incident management process and extends it into this multi-service provider model, so that we build this collaborative culture where all of the service providers start to work together, to be incentivized to work together. And that fixes a lot of the operational issues, but it also enables a lot more focus on innovation and lifting the service quality overall. So the organisation that commissions the SIAM model benefits from the ability to work with all these different service providers and benefits from the fact that they have this flexible, scalable supply chain. They can add and remove service providers as they wish. They can work with giant organizations. They can work with, you know, tiny micro organizations that are best of breed in what they do. And all of that becomes much more seamless. And just the last point that I would make is it's easy just to think about external providers, and I'm as guilty as anybody of just saying, you know, external suppliers, contracts, targets, penalties. But the one thing that we mustn't miss is SIAM is just as applicable to internal teams that form part of service delivery as well. And what you do sometimes find is you have these organisations that have actually got a really good grip on external suppliers, but the internal teams are just doing their own thing. There's no targets, there's no measurement, there's no management. So we can bring them into the SIAM model as well. In fact, we could have a SIAM model that's purely made up of internal service providers in some instances. But having this end-to-end governance and management is really the key to the benefits that SIAM is going to deliver. And that allows organisations to be, you know, competitive, responsive, flexible in today's environment.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. Simon, Michelle, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, everything that Claire said, obviously. One of the things, I think it's kind of like an evolution that you see. So service management is always about hiding the complexity for the end consumer. And additionally, that was technology. There were applications, there was network, there was servers, desktop stuff, and that was what service management was all about. And as Claire alluded to, we had one service provider in those days, either internal or maybe one external, but that started becoming more complex, more components, but also more providers, some external, some internal, some large, some small, different type of contracts. And so rather than managing the technology, we started managing these service providers individually often, because that sat in a contract management space or something along those lines in there. So SIAM is saying, look, no, we're integrating at these providers into a service, and the providers then integrate the technology that they use, which allows you to use very specialized in there. So I think it's kind of an evolution where we look less at technology and more at integrating providers, which then also allows us, not just what Claire says, to have different types of providers in there, but to extend beyond technology, beyond IT, and we can do SIAM in an enterprise because there are different providers in HR spaces or finance areas or any other area, and the concepts of SIAM are applicable in that space as well. The last comment I want to make, because again, I want to make sure everyone gets their time in there, is that to me, certainly when we started, the thing that was unique to SIAM, and I still don't really find in other working practices and methodologies, is that functional or structural explanation of the organization. So the role of the service integrator as being different from a service provider, as being different from a customer organization, explaining the roles and responsibilities and the collaboration between all of them. That to me is still one of the unique things that SIAM brings, as well as some very other best practices.
Brilliant, thanks Simon. Michelle, is there anything you'd like to add?
Many points, but I guess just a key one here really is, and I'm giggling to myself because Claire made a point when we were at a conference the other day about someone had asked her whether SIAM was posh supplier management. And I think that's quite interesting. I think we'll come on to talk about this misapprehension of what SIAM is and what SIAM isn't. So we can debunk that a little bit more, but I can, you know, I guess the key message here is it's not just about managing suppliers, it's about building a culture of collaboration within an organization. It's also about, to some degree, relinquishing responsibility for the customer organization to have to worry about day-to-day value from their service provision. If they've got a service integration function looking after that, even if it's their own internal team, it allows them to concentrate on their day job, whatever that might be, based on their industry, and puts the service integrator in that role of managing the complexity associated with these, complex sourcing models. And it just allows customer organizations to get the value back from that level of investment.
Brilliant, thanks Michelle. So we're going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to stay with you, Michelle, for this one. So what are the typical organisational drivers for SIAM? I mean, I know Claire touched upon some of the benefits that SIAM can bring. So what would you say are the typical drivers that you're seeing for SIAM?
So there are lots. When we think about drivers, it's around the impetus. Why will an organisation think, hey, this SIAM thing is for me? Unfortunately, you still get a situation where you get organisations who see SIAM and think this is new, we should do it, rather than there's a really good rationale. Okay, yeah. and that's where we should focus our attention. So there's a number of things. I mean, I guess one of the most common ones is around satisfaction or lack thereof. Satisfaction with the way that their service provision is operating, and that can translate to things like, you know, the service performance that they're receiving. You know, it can sort of focus on things like they feel that they're not getting the ability to evolve and change as an organisation. It can be around the lack of collaboration with service providers. So that whole concept of lack of satisfaction is often a key driver. The second one, I think, which is really a focus, and it comes back year on year, and we're going to talk about the SIAM survey, is around the complexity of sourcing. We're all experiencing it. So it doesn't matter sort of what the model is that we've got today. Most of us have got complexity on our sourcing. And it means that they have things like shadow IT, or multi-sourcing, or, you know, just an increase in the number of service providers, which creates a complexity, which means that services aren't operating the way that the customer envisaged. So that's the second one. And I guess the third one commonly that we hear is just this need for operational efficiency, because the contracts with service providers are typically sourced in a very sort of singular and siloed way. There is no obligation between the service providers to operate effectively together. So they're all doing their own thing, quite merrily saying we're delivering against our contract and our service performance. But from the customer's point of view, that's not the value that they're getting. So there, I guess for me, the three main ones that we typically hear people talk about. There are some others, but that's probably a really good starting point, I would say.
Brilliant, thanks Michelle. Simon, Claire, is there anything that you'd add there?
I want to do a negative one that unfortunately is quite typical, that people are looking for some kind of silver bullet, and then they've gone down a certain path, which might have been an ITIL path or agile or whatever, and they suddenly decide, oh, we're needing some SIAM, and they basically haven't thought about it. So that their driver is actually somewhere in what Michelle says. It's probably the complexity of the sourcing environment, but they haven't really thought properly about why they want it and what they want to achieve with it, which makes it a lot harder to kind of get the right design and the right transformation into a SIAM model in there. But unfortunately, it does still happen.
Thanks, Simon. And you talk about challenges and complexities around doing SIAM. So that leads me nicely on to the next question. So the main challenges when implementing a SIAM model, Claire, what is it that you come across with those challenges?
So this is one of the things that we actually ask organisations about when we're doing the global SIAM survey. So we've been doing the SIAM survey for 5 years now, and this year was very kindly sponsored by Kinetic IT, and it's interesting to see that the same challenges are high ranking year after year, which I don't know what that says about our ability to learn in the IT industry, or whether some things are just common. I mean, if you look at this year and last year's results, organisational change management and embedding new behaviours is far and away the top challenge that organisations face. And, you know, we will all know that this isn't something that's unique to a SIAM adoption. This is any organisational change. And my sort of suspicion behind that data is just that organisations are not taking this seriously enough as part of a SIAM transformation, and as part of any organisational transformation. There is a whole wealth of guidance available now in terms of organisational change management. You know, there's different frameworks, there's different books, but it's difficult. And, you know, the people bit, the human bit is always the challenging element of any transformation. So are we building enough time, enough budget, enough resource into our SIAM adoption programs in order to deliver that? So that's the top challenge. Creating a governance structure always also ranks highly, and again, I think this is linked to the same theme as organisational change in a way, because we are talking about changing behaviours, changing some roles and responsibilities, moving where the responsibility sits for some activities. You know, one of the SIAM authors works for an organisation that provides outsourced service integrator capabilities, and she told me she had a customer and she had to physically ask them every time they stood up from their desk, where are you going? What are you doing? Because that customer was so used to having this direct relationship with suppliers, they were just getting up, going, chatting to them and bypassing the service integrator. So she took a fairly robust approach to client management there, but it's absolutely necessary to embed these new ways of working. And then the third one, and the last one I'll touch on in detail, is the tooling and automation piece as well, which it did drop. It was 72% of respondents found that a challenge in 2021, and that's dropped to 57% in this year's survey. But it's still a significant amount of organisations that are perhaps trying to get an existing service management tool set to conform with what they need in the SIAM environment. It may be that they don't have the agreements with existing service providers to, I guess, enforce the linkage between tooling systems. So that there's huge opportunities across the SIAM model to save time, to reduce error, you know, to remove manual rekeying of data. But again, it needs to be part of that initial planning, that initial strategy, and you know, we've got other questions in the survey asking people about, is your tool set fit for purpose in a SIAM environment? And there is usually quite a significant amount of the answers are no, sometimes no, and we're not going to do anything about that. So the technology side as well. And I guess if you look at those top three challenges, you have got the sort of classic IT balance of, we've got the people stuff that's difficult, but we've also got the technology stuff that's difficult as well. So we need to have a plan and a strategy and approach that covers both of those elements.
Brilliant, thanks, Claire. And Michelle, I can see you're nodding away as Claire's talking through these challenges. I get the sense that you come across those same challenges. Is there anything else that you're finding as kind of a barrier to implementing SIAM successfully?
Well, I think what's quite interesting, over the past 5 years, those three have just bounced backwards and forwards on the top list. So they are themes that recur all the time. But a pet one for me is around just I guess, understanding of what SIAM is. And I alluded to it before, this or misunderstanding of what SIAM is, and that often means that, you know, the customer organisation who's commissioning a SIAM ecosystem quite often doesn't understand what their obligations are. So there's almost this reliance on the service integration function to magically, you know, make it all happen. Simon talked about silver bullets before. You're not trying to sort of talk too much about some of the other efforts that we've done, but one of the things that we've focused on, Simon and myself, is a piece around enabling the customer organisation to understand what their role in SIAM is, what their role related to the service provider is, why the service provider needs to be empowered and enabled by them. So for me, that's the challenge, that lack of understanding about how important the customer organisation is in a successful SIAM ecosystem.
Brilliant, thanks, Michelle. Simon, is there anything that you'd like to add there?
No, not specifically here. I'll probably be echoing what Claire and Michelle said in slightly different words. And I also know what the next question is that's coming up.
Well,
so
you definitely
we'll talk about
do.
that.
And this is going to be your question, Simon. So outsourcing versus insourcing, what is best for business?
Obviously, as an outsourcer, I have to say outsourcing, but then again, the survey clearly shows that insourcing. So as per usual, the answer is it depends. I guess the starting point needs to be what Michelle was talking about, and Claire says, this is a change in behaviors, in working practices in an organization. And this is different from traditional service management. It requires new ways of working. So there's quite a specific skill required. We'll talk about what those are in a moment, but are those skills present in the organization? If they're not, then insourcing becomes quite difficult. I mean, yes, you can maybe do some resource augmentation, hire some consultants, you can train people up. It's going to take longer, become harder in there, and outsource would come in with an element of knowledge and skill, more and more with experience over a number of years, a number of organizations about what works and what doesn't work. And it can really lead to a significant speed increase and quality increase as long as the customer participates in that. But an outsourcer is, of course, an external party. And so having an external party lording it over the different service providers, particularly if we start looking at internal service providers, may not be quite right for the organization. It's not impossible, absolutely not. But there does seem to be a number of organizations, the majority of organizations, who does want an element of control. So insourcing gives you that control, that alignment of the strategy, the business outcomes across the customer and the integrator, and being that really that one united front towards the service provider. So the foundation body of knowledge, or both body of knowledge, is also talk about a hybrid, where we have a little bit of both, which is actually a really good solution, because you could have the outsourcer do the kind of day-to-day, more dreary work, and the insourced internal service integrator part can be on an assurance level and working with policies and improvements and more future work in there. Or there is the option of a learning hybrid, where you use the outsourcer to train your internal people and move to an insourcing model in there. And we've actually seen one customer that started with Kinetic IT as the service integrator to integrate their external service providers. And it quickly, well, relatively quickly became apparent that that, of course, wasn't really all the time needed to be. And it also needed to include the internal service providers, but they were very reluctant of letting Kinetic IT be the integrator across internal teams in there. So we embarked on a transition where we basically transitioned the service integration function from Kinetic IT outsourced to this particular organization insourced, and that worked quite well. So it depends. There are benefits to the outsourcer. There are also reasons to focus on insourcing, and there are options to get the best of both worlds.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Claire, Michelle, is there anything that you'd like to add there?
I think that the thing I would add as well is, you know, whilst I agree with Simon, it depends. To outsource the service integrator role does sometimes encourage organisations to think a little bit more rigorously about what they want the service integrator to do, because they need to define that in the contract that they're going to sign. I think with the internal service integrator, I have seen on occasion that the customer organisation is just sort of assuming we'll figure this out as we go along, whereas if they're actually going to market and looking for a service provider to fulfil that service integrator role, they need to be very clear about what it is that they want from that organisation. It's like the saying, you know, if you've got a mess and you outsource it, you've just got an outsourced mess. So if you think very clearly about what you want from that organisation, going through that formal process, that procurement process, can encourage them to do that, and then hopefully what that should mean is they get that kind of value for money from their spend on the service integrator. But just as with the internal capabilities, you know, do we have the internal capabilities to create that service integrator? The same goes for the market. Is there an organisation out there that is capable of providing service integrator capabilities to us? And I think for the very large SIAM transformations, there's a lot of different organisations you can choose from. But for smaller organisations, and it's something that we have a lot of discussion about, is the adoption of SIAM principles in smaller organisations. There maybe isn't that choice. It may be that you know, you are restricted in whether you outsource or insource purely on the service providers available to you as well.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. So you've touched upon about capabilities there, so that's going to lead me on perfectly to my next question, which I'm going to point to Michelle. So about the capabilities, so what are kind of the skills and capabilities required in a successful SIAM transformation?
Well, for many years you used to get the same stock standard answer, so it goes back to people understanding or not understanding SIAM. So it was always, we've got service management capabilities, ergo we can do service integration. I think, and this is really something that I'm quite pleased about, there's more and more of an appreciation of the fact that SIAM isn't just about services and processes. There's so much more to it. So top of the tree in the survey this year was skills in business analysis, skills in organisational change management, and I'm delighted to see that they're there. I think quite often people forget that service integration is not just about integration between the service integration function and the service providers. You know, it's integration of technology, it's integration of processes, it's integration of the SIAM model back into the business. And that needs, you know, interpersonal skills, it needs relationship management skills, it needs business acumen and commercial acumen. There's so much more to it. The other thing for me is when you start to do SIAM in a mature way, you go past this operational delivery. So whilst we're keen to make sure the end-to-end service provision is functioning effectively, and the integrator takes on this elevated role, influencing the customer, influencing the service providers, and providing much more of that service assurance function. So you've got this, you know, requirement to have skills in governance and communication management and a whole host of other skills. So it's not a straightforward thing, and I think that's a positive thing, because if we move away from people just thinking, I can do ITIL or I can do process management, therefore I can do SIAM, and we recognise the complexity of what's actually going on within a SIAM ecosystem, we can start to recognise, I guess, the range of skills that are necessary for people wanting to operate effectively in a SIAM environment.
Excellent, thanks Michelle. Simon, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, more or less echoing at the word service integrator, facilitator, coordinator. I want to introduce, because I'm going to use that as well, the analogy of the service integrator in SIAM playing the role of a team manager. That could be a sporting team, and the Soccer World Cup is on, or any other thing in there. So those are the kind of skills and capabilities we're looking for. It's not about technical expertise, but it's being able to deal with the divas in the team, and the stars in the team, and the silent contributors in the team, and bringing them together and making them really into a one team culture, one team service integrated that delivers to the business. We also got to look at, which comes back to those challenges, at the skills and capability required in the customer. And so whether you insource or outsource your service integrator, there are certain things that stick with that higher level in the business around the governance. And if they were used to, which was Claire's story, to talk directly to the supplier and be kind of hands-on almost, then they need to be able to take that step back and take a governance role and take a more strategic and planning role in there. And that is a different skill and capability for those people as well. So maybe highlight those two.
And Claire, anything that you would add there?
The only thing that I would add, and really it's just to amplify, I think, what Michelle and Simon have already said, is that there's still a tendency to think about SIAM as just being sort of service management plus. You know, if you've got your ITIL certifications and you've read the body of knowledge, then you're good to go in a SIAM environment. When I think, you know, one of the areas that many SIAM models fall down on is the actual initial selection of suppliers and service providers. It's drafting of contracts, it's working with procurement, and that does actually come up as a challenge quite often, is the contractual elements. I think there's a whole set of commercial skills outside of your typical IT professional skill set that are fundamental to the success of SIAM transformation, and that's something that really there's more work needs to be done. You know, in the body of knowledge there is some guidance around contracts specific to SIAM, but that is somewhere where I think skills should be developed, and that's a bit of a gap at the moment.
Okay, brilliant, thanks Claire. And we've obviously, as we've gone through, we've talked about culture changes, collaborations. Why, and I'm going to point this to Simon, why is it important to create those conditions for collaboration instead of just focusing on the contracts?
It's kind of what you want to get out of it. Claire started saying, is it just a fancy or complex supply management? And to a degree it is, but then we start looking at those internal service providers, and there are no contracts there. So we put operational level agreements in there and then still call it supply management or something along those lines in there. But the true benefit of service integration is that the sum is more than each individual in there. So that's why I started using that team analogy. If we truly work together as service providers, we can not only create the outcome that the business wants today, but also that they want tomorrow. And if we look again at the evolution of a typical technology environment or any environment, it's not as static as it used to be. So we've got contracts for 3 years or 1 + 1 + 1 or any combination thereof in there, but we've got a constantly changing environment. We've got complexity. Michelle and I presented on VUCA recently. There's complexity, there's changes happening all the time, things that aren't in the contract. And if you create a contract culture where you basically hammer down on the provider or they hammer down on you because it stipulates that it needs to be clause 18b part 4, that's not going to work. That's not going to give the outcomes that you want. So it's really important to get that one team culture. I don't like the word, but I do like the meaning behind it, where we do work together for the outcome that we can achieve for the business in there. So collaboration and improvement, I want to put that right in there. I've always said those are some of the key tenets within a SIAM environment in there. Yes, we've got contracts, and we need to be smarter about contracts, and there's good guidance around that, and it is more complex, but we do need to work on that collaboration, on that information when in the middle of the night something goes wrong, or when the business is changing, or when there's a new technology that is coming out, or all those things that are happening that weren't there when the original contract came out. And if we then have to go into negotiations and extend, that's never going to work. So very important in a modern business to create a team of providers that works together. Just one comment on that, because I do find it important with that team analogy, and Claire mentioned it. You've got to be smarter about getting the right providers, because if you hire someone in your team, you don't always pick the most qualified person or the cheapest person or whatever, but you pick the person who fits in the team.
Yeah.
Who you think can work with the people that are already there. So in a SIAM environment, through service orchestration and other things, we can start looking at criteria that we want from a provider, not just to deliver this service at that level for this price, but also deliver this collaboration with those other service providers for the future.
Brilliant, thanks Simon. Claire, Michelle, I can see both of you nodding away fanatically with everything Simon says there. Would either of you like to add to the discussion there?
I guess
Sorry, go for it, Claire.
Oh, thank you. I think the only thing I would say is, nobody likes being told what to do. We all like to have, even if it's just the illusion of free will. So I think if you can create that condition where people feel empowered to contribute, excited to contribute rather than, and you must do this, then you will automatically get better results. So it comes back to that organisational change management piece. If people feel like they are involved in the change, if they understand what's happening, they are much more likely to be active contributors and supporters.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. And Michelle, what were you going to touch upon there?
Oh, it's similar to what the guys have already said, really. I think that the moment you start to have to pull a contract out when you're sitting down with a group of service providers as a service integrator, you're in trouble. So I would sort of say that's the last thing you should be doing. We made the point in the body of knowledge that this isn't management by contract. We want contracts that define obligations between service providers, but the moment we have to start going down to the detail of pulling those onto the table, we know we're in trouble. So it's the balance of creating a culture of service providers who want to work together, who are focused on working together, who are all about value for the customer. That's where you get that shift in attitudes that I think you're really looking for within a fully functioning SIAM ecosystem.
Brilliant, thanks Michelle, and thank you to all of you for your insights there. It's certainly been a really interesting discussion from my point of view, so hopefully the audience have enjoyed it as well. In a moment we are going to take questions from the audience. We're just going to cover a bit about the global survey first. So just a reminder, if anyone does want to submit any questions, you can do so via the panel in the control window on the side of your webinar. So in terms of the SIAM survey, we've obviously talked throughout the discussion about certain things that have popped up time after time. So Claire, I'm going to hand it over to you just to talk through and highlight some of the 2022 results.
Thank you. So the Scopism Global SIAM Survey has been running for 5 years now. Each year it's sponsored by an organisation in the SIAM space, and we're incredibly grateful to our sponsors because they allow us to bring something high quality to the community and share that freely. So this year's survey was sponsored by Kinetic, and Kinetic have been prior sponsors as well, and the years we've been sponsored by For Me. And really the nice thing now about having this track record behind us is we start to see trends, and I think we've all brought our favourite statistic from this year. So I'm just going to pick on one thing which made me really, really happy, and that's from the demographics section, which is about the gender split in the SIAM community, because we ask people each year about their gender, and the number of women working in the SIAM space is gradually increasing. So 2020 was 16%, 2021 was 18%, and 2022 we're up to 25% of our respondents identifying as female. And these can be tricky questions to ask when you're building a survey. A lot of organisations ask this question with no real purpose, and the general guidance around building a survey is don't ask for this type of information if you don't need it. But I think that there is a gender imbalance across the wider IT community. That is reflected, in the SIAM space. 70% of respondents this year are male. So I think it is important information. And, for me, who has been working in IT for pretty much my whole career, it's such a positive thing to see that number increasing. I'm hoping I didn't steal your stat there, Michelle.
What would you like to add to that, Michelle? What did you have a favourite takeaway from the results this year?
So Claire did steal my stat. And that's okay. It was that, and I guess another demographic one, which I think is really interesting. So there's a section that talks about typical roles in SIAM. It talks about salary and job titles and so on. But there's another section that's linked to that looks at age. And there's two groups in the sort of 31 to 60 category that have always led. But what I think is really encouraging this year is the number of people below the age of 30 who are working within SIAM environments. We haven't really seen that before. So maybe that tells us that, you know, there are greater opportunities for younger people to move into SIAM and not just these core high-ranking roles that we often see. But I think that also means that opportunity to have more extensive careers and to build more capability within SIAM, which I think has to be a positive thing. So yay for the younger folks moving into the environment. I think that's something that we should celebrate and hope to see more of next year.
Brilliant, thanks Michelle. Simon, was there anything that you'd like to add on the results?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about a particular stat. I'm going to look about trending and comparison because I think that's more relevant. And the first thing is that even within the survey, you can compare, it says here down the bottom, there's questions answered by people who are planning to adopt SIAM. Then pretty much the same questions are also answered by organizations that have already adopted SIAM. And it's really interesting to see the difference in things like challenges and duration and other things just between those two groups in there. Of course, as Claire says, we've done this now for 5 years. And if you look at a trend over 5 years, you see some interesting things as well. And that has been done because in the survey, there are also various remarks made by some industry expert about what they thought of the results, what they thought of the trends in there, and how they see that reflect in their own world. And those have free text comments, and there were also some free text comments in the survey. They themselves are also a wealth of insights into how people work with SIAM.
Brilliant, thank you. So we are now going to move on. We've obviously talked about the body of knowledge as we've gone through. I'm going to open this to Michelle and Simon. Why do we want, you know, why is it important for professionals to look at these body of knowledges? Obviously, we've got the foundation level and the professional. We obviously have published these in IT Governance Publishing, which, you know, it's been wonderful to work with you. Why should people go out and read these body of knowledges?
I alluded to it before. The SIAM stuff is not new. What is new-ish, I guess, and we say new and then we look back and say, gosh, it's been however many, six, 7 years since these were first written, and they've been updated, of course, since then. But I think what's really useful, as with any best practice, it's the codification, it's the unifying of language, it's the really sort of putting some purpose and principles around this common view built by experts throughout the globe who are saying, look, we've tried and tested it, and here's some really good ways of approaching some of this stuff. So that for me is, you know, why you should read it. It's been written by people with real practical experience. So although it's, you know, theoretic guidance because it's a book, what both of the books, and especially, you know, the professional body of knowledge has is reams and reams of real life experience and anecdotes and stories about do this, don't do that, try this. These are the experiences that we've had. So I can't sort of extol it enough. And of course, you know, it's completely accessible. Why wouldn't you read it if you were embarking on any sort of pursuit in a complex multi-source kind of environment? So it's a must read as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant, thanks Michelle. Simon, is there something that you'd like to add there?
Yeah, just to slightly extend that. So the foundation body of knowledge is that common sense written down concept in there, and it is still unique. It's not a replacement of any other methodology or best practice out there. It provides some common sense description. I think anyone could benefit from understanding the SIAM concepts of the position of the service integrator, the roles and responsibilities between them and the customer retained, the concept of the one term, the forums, the collaboration. That's good for anyone. And as Michelle alluded to, but it is worth stressing again, the professional body of knowledge is such a great reference book. There is so much practical knowledge in there. There's so many examples highlighted, not just the theory that has been further extended, but lots of examples of how to do and how not to do things as well. So if you are in a SIAM organization or a transformation, there is really good knowledge in there. So yeah, why wouldn't you? And the last reason is, of course, that they are the official literature for the training courses. So there's a foundation training course for SIAM and a professional, and it uses the body of knowledge in there. And I guess my final comment is that you can't beat a book. Particularly as a reference book, there's nothing like picking up a book and leafing through it and going through it and maybe writing some notes in the sidelines. So yeah, there's no reason why you wouldn't, and there's lots of reasons why you should.
Brilliant, thanks, Simon. And I'm with you on that. You know, I've been in publishing now for 15 years, but I will always choose for my personal collection a physical book. You know, IT Governance Publishing, we do PDF, we do EPUB, Kindle, audio now, but I'm with you. Yeah, there's nothing like the feel of a good book. Claire, is there anything that you'd like to add on the books?
I think the only thing I would add and just reiterate is you'll see on the cover of both of the books there the et al. Edition, and really what that's demonstrating is there were way too many people involved in writing these books to possibly put on the cover. These are not books based on my experience or, you know, my Michelle and Simon's experience. We were supported in an unbelievably generous way by the SIAM community. When we went through this authoring process, we had, I think there's been more than 60 people involved across the two bodies of knowledge, and it's their generosity and their experience reflected in the box that make them so useful. So I'm always very, very grateful to everybody who was involved as an author or reviewer, you know, helping to split up some of the discussions that we had. But yeah, these are based on the knowledge of the community.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. And we've just flashed up on screen, as Claire said, with the SIAM books. It was very much a collaborative effort, but obviously with IT Governance Publishing, we have published a number of Claire's other titles covering the subject of ITIL. So for both those ITIL books and the SIAM books, there'll be links in your slides when they get emailed out to you, so that you can click through, read more about it, and yeah, so on. So I just wanted to say thank you, Claire, Simon and Michelle. That has been a wonderful discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of it. I think everyone has no doubt learnt lots of little snippets that they can take away and work on. I'm just looking at the question box, and I think we've got one in there, which is probably good because we are running out of time. So someone has put here, what is the difference between SIAM and ITIL? And I know we touched on that earlier when someone said, oh, I can do ITIL, so I can do SIAM. I'm going to open that up to all three of you. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll take it then if everyone is quiet in there. So SIAM was codified in 2015, 2016, when we're still talking about ITIL version 3, which was very much about processes. And SIAM added that structure of the integration layer, the customer retained, the working practices to work with each other. And actually, if I'm honest, SIAM added a lot of stuff that has now popped up in ITIL 4, but they are still quite different. SIAM is the only practice that is focused on that multi-provider organization, the structure around it, the working practices around it, the roles and responsibilities. And it works very well with ITIL. So if you are currently an ITIL shop, you don't have to throw that away to use SIAM. You can add the SIAM elements, components, working practice and structures in your service integration and customer retained layer, or the opposite, if you are building a SIAM model, You can very much use the ITIL guidance, particularly in the process phase, but things like the guiding principles as well. So they are complementary, but they are definitely not the same.
Brilliant, thanks, Simon. And Claire, I guess, as you know, you've been practicing both and you know, written on both. What would you say are the key differences?
I think Simon's summed it up incredibly well, so not much to add there, but I think this comes back to that question we had about skills. And you know, back when I started in service management, ITIL was pretty much the only thing, and you had people who called themselves ITIL consultants and ITIL organisations. And I think now the scope of service management has expanded significantly, particularly in the last few years, and service management professionals need to have a broader awareness of what's happening. I think to be a service management professional now, you should have an understanding of ITIL, you should have an understanding of SIAM, you should have an appreciation of DevOps, of Agile. So I think it's part of the evolution, you know, as technology's evolved, as sourcing's evolved, our ways of working have evolved as well. And as service management professionals, we need to keep ourselves up to date.
Brilliant, thanks, Claire. There's also apparently two other questions, but I'm unable to see them. So what we will do, I will get to those afterwards, and we'll get Simon, Claire, and Michelle to answer those via email, and we'll send the answers out to the delegates. So that does bring us to the end of today's session. I hope you've all found it informative, as I have. Michelle, Claire, Simon, are there any parting words that you would like to leave us with?
Ladies first.
I just mirror the conversations we've had. If you haven't read the books, read the books. If you haven't tapped into the Global SIAM survey, please do that. These resources are incredible and will tell you a massive amount about the SIAM marketplace, which is what this has been about. And you know, reach out at any point if you want more information about SIAM. We're all three of us always happy to share and extol its virtues.
Brilliant, thanks.
Yep.
Claire, last words from you.
I would just add that the 5 years of the white paper are available on the Scopus website in the free download section. We've got a busy agenda planned for 2023. We've got some exciting announcements coming about community as well, and ongoing development of SIAM thinking. So when you're on the website, just sign up for the newsletter as well, and we'll make sure we keep you informed.
Brilliant, thanks, Claire. And then finally, Simon.
I just want to say that service integration is here to stay. Combining things, different providers is there for every organization. And please don't see SIAM as a silver bullet, as a thing that will solve that, but see it as a categorization, reference, codification of working practices that you can apply in such an environment, which anyone has. So it's not a all or nothing. You can use parts of it, and it's really good information that's out there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days, evenings, afternoons, wherever you are in the world. Bye.